The School Chicago Students Deserve is a comprehensive proposal to fundamentally improve public schools for all Chicago children. A proposal that is based on educational research.
There's been much debate about what is wrong with public education in our city. As educators, parents, and neighborhood leaders, we know what's wrong with Chicago public schools, we know what's right, and we know what works. We are here today to release our vision of what a world-class education should look like for every student, not just those from higher income brackets. Our report, The School Chicago's Children and Students Deserve, will quickly become the public policy mantra for all people truly interested in our city's public schools. It is a compilation of data, extensive research, and narrative on what Chicago needs to provide our students the best education we have to offer. Non-educators have been running our school system for decades. Most have little connection or accountability to the communities affected. Their venture capitalist approach to public schools has not changed over the years. Neglect them, suck them dry, let them die on the vine, blame them for their own demise, and then turn them over to private interests. For far too long, our students have been shortchanged. Their teachers have been undermined, and their schools have been financially starved of the resources they need and deserve. Imagine packing 50 students in a classroom in school communities deprived of libraries, textbooks, decent washrooms, proper ventilation, and a fresh coat of paint. Imagine a system where experienced local professionals are driven out of the classroom and replaced with others from throughout the country who are foreign to the city and the uniqueness of its neighborhoods. And imagine a system that hoards funds until the schools close, then lavish those same taxpayer dollars on entrepreneurial replacements preferred by political connections. This is our system. This is the status quo. This is what we must change. The research and conclusions in our report suggests we allow this because Chicago's public schools now serve primarily low-income African American and Latino students, the vast majority of whom attend intensely segregated schools. The statistics place our world-class city at or near the top of the educational injustice scale. Those who favor closing the door to traditional neighborhood schools say we can no longer accept the status quo. On that, we agree. The longtime focus on charters, magnets, closings, turnarounds, and similar schemes has no basis in research, experience, or evidence. Although we don't control the policies, the curriculum, or the purse strings, educators must be in the forefront of developing education policy, not politicians and venture capitalists. We intend the schools Chicago students deserve to redirect attention to what works, to the experts with the research, experience, and evidence behind them to fix what's wrong and do what's right. That's the best door we know to leading all of Chicago to world-class status. I would like to present to you the main architect of our study, the head of our research department, Dr. Carol Cariff.
As teachers, we experience on a daily basis both the joy and frustration of being a teacher. Joy from our students and knowing the important role we play in their lives. Frustration because our students deserve so much more from their education. As a union, it's our responsibility to assert leadership on educational issues, to familiarize ourselves with the research and offer practical solutions. That is the goal of this report. One thing we know is that the policies of the past 20 years, both locally and nationally, have not solved the problem of inequities between the education received by Chicago public school students and their peers in wealthy suburban or private schools. One obvious reason is inequitable funding. Illinois is among the bottom 3 states when it comes to fairness in funding for education. Illinois school funding comes mostly through local property taxes, so communities with concentrated poverty receive fewer school funding dollars. Research from the Education Law Center shows that despite having the 5th largest state economy in the U.S., Illinois ranks 33rd in the country for percent of gross domestic product spent on public education. Furthermore, according to the Center for American Progress, in Illinois, African American and Latino students receive little more than 90% of the per pupil expenditure received by white students. The paper that you have today outlines solutions to these funding inequities, including asking corporations to pay their fair share for the education of those who may work in their companies or buy their products. It calls on the city to take back unallocated TIF funds and use the money for services, including the schools. It calls for the revamping of school funding structures to provide comparable funding for both high and low poverty districts, as has been done in other places such as New Jersey. What can this reprioritization of funding do for Chicago's students? First of all, it can buy smaller class sizes. The groundbreaking 1999 Tennessee STAR project showed that randomly putting students into small classes of 13 to 17 instead of normal classes of 22 to 25 led not only to academic improvements during the time the students were in the small classes from kindergarten to 3rd grade, but also that those students had improved academic results throughout their school career, into high school and beyond. Because of that study, 32 states and countless school districts created policies requiring small class sizes, but not Illinois and not Chicago. According to statistics from ISB, the Illinois State Board of Education, Chicago's kindergarten class size is larger than 95% of the school districts in Illinois. At the early childhood level, Chicago has the 12th highest average class size in Illinois. At kindergarten through 3rd grade, 28 is supposed to be the maximum class size in Chicago. But many classes start out with more students, sometimes as many as 40 students in a kindergarten class. By setting this class size, which CPS is allowed to do without union bargaining, they do a tremendous disservice to young students in this crucial early part of their school. They create the conditions that get many young people off to a bad start in their educational lives. If CPS were to lower kindergarten through 3rd grade class size from 28 down to 20, it would cost $170 million. This is a drop in the bucket for the CPS budget. It's a small price to pay for something so important. Professional organizations of social workers, school psychologists, counselors, and school nurses have carefully studied the necessary number of these professionals needed to properly serve students. CPS does not even come close to what is recommended. By looking at the numbers of service professionals employed by CPS and comparing those numbers to the ones recommended, we found that CPS falls short by about 2,500 staff. However, the actual numbers needed are probably greater because of the population CPS serves, which is 86% low income. Every study that compares academic outcomes by income finds that poverty is the #1 correlate to low achievement. For example, At the end of the 2011 school year, there were 15,580 homeless students attending CPS schools. If all of the 370 social workers currently employed by CPS only provided services for homeless students, they would still have a caseload of 42. This would give social workers just a few hours a month to spend meeting the ongoing needs of each homeless student. Of course, social workers provide services for students with homes as well. They work with students who are abused, involved with gangs, neglected, pregnant, or have substance abuse or anger management issues, along with other needs. Social workers also are charged with helping students and their families access social services and working closely with special needs students and their families. Similarly, school nurses, counselors, and psychologists play a crucial role in our schools and should not be understaffed. Our research found that in 2012, 58 years since Brown versus Board of Education was to end segregated schools, close to 70% of African American students in Chicago attend schools that are intensely segregated. Greater than 90% of students at the school are African American. There are many inequities associated with this. The paper lays out other important factors, including the need for students to have access to art, music, world language, and physical education classes on a regular basis, the importance of all students having access to pre-kindergarten and kindergarten classes, the importance of providing appropriate education for special education and emergent bilingual students, to provide quality school facilities, and to partner with parents. In this report, CTU has outlined research-based solutions to move CPS to provide the schooling that all our students deserve. A child's education should not depend on race or zip code. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kara. Julie Westerhoff, Executive Director of Parents United for Responsible Education.
Thanks, Karen. Good morning, I'm Julie Westerhoff, as Karen just said, and I'm very glad to be here. First of all, as a parent group, PURE wants to take this opportunity to reaffirm that we stand strong with our children's teachers in the fight for a high-quality education for every child. Parents trust teachers more than politicians, mayors, former basketball players, education hobbyists, Tribune editorial writers, or wealthy philanthropists to know how to educate children. We know that teachers care about our children's education the way we do, and we trust teachers to know and do what's best for them in the classroom. These days, parents are being bombarded with million-dollar advertising, some of it trying to pass as news, and some as movies and documentaries, promoting the privatization of public education. Every day we hear about how terrible the schools are and how terrible the teachers are. We're supposed to feel afraid, and that's supposed to make us run scared to the hyped-up charter or turnaround schools. It's easy to know that this strategy isn't working because now the privatizers are funding fake parent groups to create the appearance of parents wanting what corporate reformers want. You know, more testing, more charters, fewer union teachers. This leads me to the second reason why it's so good to be here on this occasion. I want to take the opportunity to thank the Chicago Teachers Union for putting together such a well-researched report about the kind of education our children need to succeed, and to thank them for bringing attention to what we should all really be talking about, starting with the fact that children who live in poverty need smaller class sizes, better prepared, experienced, and compensated teachers, more resources, less teaching to the test, and parents who are welcome partners in the school improvement process. We look forward to sharing this excellent resource with parents in Chicago and across the nation as we move the conversation forward about what children really need. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. We have Dr. Kevin Kumashiro from the University of Illinois. He's a professor in education policy, and he's president-elect of the National Association for Multicultural Education. Kevin.
Yes, it's Kumashiro, Kumashiro. Thank you, Karen. I also lead a network here in Chicago of over 60 researchers from universities throughout the Chicagoland area. This organization, the Chicagoland Researchers and Advocates for Transformative Education, is very excited about the release of this report for at least 3 reasons. One is that the report helps us to debunk misconceptions. There are a lot of messages that we hear about what's wrong with public schools and what are the solutions that will fix them. And sometimes these messages are quite contradictory. But often, the messages get repeated so often in the media, by our political leaders, by our educational leaders, even in our everyday conversations, that the messages become taken for granted. They become conventional wisdom. They become so commonsensical that everyone seems to accept that this is how we fix schools. And often it's because the messages are pretty compelling, right? Hey, we have one of the shortest school days, so you know what we need to do? We need to lengthen the school day. That's going to fix the problem. Or, hey, our students aren't doing so well on tests, so you know what? Let's focus more time on test prep. Okay. Well, in some ways, those messages are pretty compelling. I sit there and go, yeah, okay, that makes kind of some sense, until I sit there and think about, well, what does the research actually tell us? The research actually not only does not often back up the solutions being put forward, often the research tells us that the solutions being put forward can make the problem worse, right? And so one example is with narrowing the curriculum. Common sense tells us you're not good with reading, all right, let's really focus on basic reading skills and narrow the curriculum. But the research actually tells us that the most effective way to teach reading is to teach reading in context, is to actually make the curriculum richer, right? We cannot be relying on common sense to drive education policy and reform. We need to be basing our decisions on a much stronger vision for effective schooling that is based on solid body of evidence. And this leads to the second reason we're excited about this report, which is that it is grounded in research. This is not merely a campaign platform or an opinion paper. This is a paper that is drawing on research to debunk misconceptions, to present the realities, and to offer research-based alternatives, right? And we should be skeptical of proposals that do not point to the research, just as we should be skeptical of proposals that make schools move in a direction that makes them look even less like the best schools in our country and the world, right? If you look at the best schools in this country and across the world, do they look like what the reforms are asking us to make our schools look like when they struggle? Right? Do they have narrowed curriculum? Do they have high-stakes testing? Do they have non-union teachers? And so on and so forth. Right? Do they have the longest school days? Do they take away recess and the arts? Right? What's the vision that we're trying to get at? And this is the third reason that we're really excited about this report, is that it offers sound alternatives. Right? It is offering us alternatives for school reform that is grounded in research, that has a very powerful vision for what it means to educate every child for success, and that is grounded in a very kind of community-oriented approach to reforming schools and supporting our nation's young people. So thank you to Chicago Teachers Union. I hope we all learn from and engage in this report.
Thank you, Kevin. We have with us Dr. Pauline Lippman, who has done so much research and who, quite frankly, is responsible for me finding out about what was going on in Chicago. Having read one of her papers and starting to delving actually changed the course of my life. So I would like to introduce you to Dr. Pauline Lippman from the University of Illinois at Chicago.
Thank you, Karen, and good morning. As someone whose research and teaching focuses on improving education, especially in urban schools, I want to say, finally, an education plan instead of a business plan for Chicago Public Schools. The school Chicago students deserve is a comprehensive proposal to fundamentally improve public schools for all Chicago children, a proposal that is based on educational research, what we actually know about what makes quality, equitable schools. The Chicago Teacher Union proposal to strengthen public education in Chicago is a sharp alternative to the status quo. The failed corporate-style policies of the past 15 years, based on testing, punishment, and disinvestment in neighborhood schools. These policies have produced little progress and much damage, especially for African American and Latino students, and that is very well documented in the research that we have. As the Chicago Teachers Union proposal frankly points out, we have near apartheid schooling in Chicago. Many schools are reduced to minimalist test prep centers, and teachers are reduced to demoralized testing masters. Years of draining neighborhood schools of resources and failing to invest in them, especially in African American communities, and then closing them and opening selective enrollment schools or turning them over to private, charter, and turnaround operators have created chaos. We urgently need to switch course. The schools Chicago deserve is a new direction. A concrete, practical, all-rounded set of policy proposals that could be the building blocks for high-quality neighborhood schools for every child in Chicago. The report names the inequities and injustices in the system and addresses them head-on. It makes sound, research-based proposals for supporting students with special needs, for early education for all students, for wraparound support services and quality school facilities, and additional resources for the schools that need them the most. It moves away from the status quo of minimal, punitive schooling, especially for African American students, to a vision, a practical vision, of a rich, all-rounded education that all children deserve and that schools serving more affluent children already have. This is not a never, never land image of what we think schools could never be. In fact, there are many schools like this in this country, and even some in Chicago, but they are not serving the vast majority of our students. The report moves away from the status quo of blaming and controlling teachers to identifying the resources and policies that will actually improve teaching and learning. It calls for what the research tells us is fundamental: giving teachers the conditions they need to teach, time to plan together, smaller classes, more assistance, and giving them the respect and salaries they deserve. I also want to say that this policy proposal signals a new day for teachers' unions in this country. It represents a teachers' union, it comes out of a teachers' union, that not only defends the rights and working conditions of teachers, which it should, but it takes responsibility alongside parents to insist on equitable, just, holistic, world-class schools for all children. The report very clearly demonstrates that supporting teachers and giving teachers the respect, the conditions, and the salaries that they need and deserve is integrally linked with transforming our schools by putting more resources in. This is a putting resources in proposal, not a taking resources out punishment proposal. So it's qualitatively different from the status quo that we have now. And I think it's a very exciting opportunity for Chicago to move forward, finally.
Thank you, Pauline. We are fortunate to have a parent and a community activist and leader. This woman has an awful lot going for her. We have worked together on several projects. Rosalisa Grillier. from Power Pack. Tell them about your pack.
Good morning. Rosalia Grillier, R-O-S-A-Z-L-I-A. The last name is G-R-I-L-L-I-E-R. And as Karen mentioned, I'm so excited to be here today because I am a parent of 2 teenage daughters, one within the Chicago public school system, the other in the charter school system. I've seen the best of both worlds. I've seen the worst of both worlds. I'm also a survivor of physical challenges beyond your comprehension. And therefore, I stand here today to speak to you on our excitement about this report. I'm also a member of the Citywide Leadership Council of Power Pack, Parents Organized to Win, Educate, and Renew Policy Action Council. 8 years ago, our group of African American and Latino mothers and grandmothers came together from across Chicago to make positive changes for our children and grandchildren and to ensure the well-being of all of Chicago's children. We have been hard at work during those years, addressing a number of issues surrounding families, including what we call the cradle to prison pipeline in our education system. Through our early learning campaign, we've been increasing access to early learning programs and in our underserved communities so our children can get a running start. In our Recess for All campaign, we have been making efforts to enhance our children's experience in the schools as bringing Recess for All back and making students healthier, teaching them to resolve conflict, improving their academic performance, and treating them like human beings by giving them a much-needed break during the school day to work out the pent-up energy. Also, our elementary justice campaign was formulated to keep our children in school, working to reduce the punitive practices, the number of suspensions and expulsions, and to lead our students to success, preventing dropping out and replacing those negative practices with positive programs that help the students realize their mistakes and make amends, particularly in the elementary schools. Over the past year, we've been meeting and partnering with Chicago Teachers Union to discuss these concerns, as well as to ensure the importance of parent participation in our children's education, and collaborating to find solutions. We are so pleased with this report, and we are so glad to see that our issues are highlighted in this document that is taking a comprehensive look at students' education, experiences, and proposing ways to make schools a place for children to want to be and where they can succeed. Education is key. If a student is not present in the classroom, how can they be educated? We have to take a serious, realistic, and honest look, and I believe that CPS should do that as well. And we are thankful again to CTU for taking this step toward our children's future. Thank you.
We have Ileana Espinoza-Crable, who is an education organizer with the Albany Park Neighborhood Organization.
Hello, good morning. I'm going to be super brief. I'm here actually on behalf of our parent leaders who couldn't be here this morning because they're either working or taking children to school. So I guess just a couple quick points. I want to say thanks to CTU and other community partners who put this incredible report together. I think it's incredibly necessary. Also, I think it's a very clear representation that CTU does value community and parents and sees them as integral parts of of children's education, right? So a couple of quick points about the work that we're doing in Albany Park on the north side and how it's connected to this report is one that parents are fighting first and foremost to sort of debunk this misconception that parents and community don't have a role in their children's education, and that they're uneducated or they don't understand to the extent that administrators do, right? So that's one thing. The second is that parents are really fighting for arts education, and not just in the sense that it's enrichment or it's this filler, right, to relieve a little bit of stress, but really that it's part of a full curriculum, that it's part of a comprehensive education, and it's something that's really been missing in our children's education, and that in research shows that especially in low-income communities of color is really, really important. And essentially, I mean, very basically, I think our parents are fighting for what children in private schools and very privileged settings have. And we keep saying like a world-class education. I think that's very true. So that's one piece. And then the second is bilingual education, which I think is something that we don't talk about enough. I live and work in Albany Park. My parents are from Albany Park, and in our schools we see that this is a really big issue. It's an everyday reality that within our neighborhood schools, 30 to 40 languages and cultures are represented. And how do you deal with high populations, right, of English language learners? So something else parents are really pushing for is to get away from this framework that bilingual students, that English language learners, enter CPS schools with a deficiency, but rather that they enter schools with a strength, right, knowing another language. And that we start to see all CPS students of all different shades and all different backgrounds as all being language learners and all having access to world language and dual language programs, and that being a really big key to having a world-class education and a full comprehensive curriculum. So I'm going to leave it there. Just, again, thank you to CTU and all the folks that are here today.
Thank you, Ileana. We have saved a very unexpected guest who came from Boston. We have with us Dr. Monty Neal, who runs an organization called Fair Test. And he has done a tremendous amount of research on the testing regime that our students are now punished by, and that we are going to continue to add higher and higher and higher stakes to. I would like to give you an opportunity to have a few minutes to listen to Dr. Neal.
Thank you very much, Karen. I'm very pleased to be able to be here in Chicago today on behalf of Fair Test, the National Center for Fair and Open Testing, in order to support Chicago Teacher Union's proposals to genuinely improve Chicago schools. Fair Test is the nation's only organization focused solely on ensuring that assessment of students is fair, open, valid, and educationally sound. The CTU report correctly points out that high-stakes, standardized testing is a key component of the pedagogy of poverty. Indeed, the combination of city policies and the federal No Child Left Untested law is rapidly turning schools into little more than test prep programs. Such programs fail our children and leave them behind, particularly children of color, low-income children, English language learners, and students with disabilities. The reduction or elimination of recess, arts, social studies, science, world languages, and other subjects that narrows learning opportunities, particularly for low-income students, is largely a product of the high-stakes testing regime. And the relentless push to raise test scores at the expense of educating the whole child. High-stakes testing is also tied in with punitive disciplinary policies that funnel too many children on a pipeline to prison. High-quality, teacher-led assessment is a vital part of teaching and learning. Research and experience shows that teachers designing, using, and interpreting a range of assessments, particularly performance assessments, is an essential component of the strong, ongoing collaborative professional learning called for by the Chicago Teachers Union and for the effective education of all children. In conclusion, Chicago needs to reduce its testing It must work with state and federal governments to end the high-stakes misuses of standardized tests and empower educators working together to produce and use a rich range of high-quality assessments. Thank you.
I guess that's everybody. So we'll open to questions.
Karen, have you shared this with CPS?
Has it been shared with CPS? Has it been released with them? No, it hasn't yet.
And have, if you consider this an alternative to the longer school day, or do you see some of these things being able to be enhanced by having this longer school day to do the arts education that you're talking about?
Well, the longer school day, from what we understand and what has been clearly stated by the mayor, is that it's a done deal, if I understand correctly. So we don't even address that because that is not what's important. We're more interested in what that day looks like and what schools should look like in order to educate our children appropriately.
Karen, your executive summary calls the system apartheid-like. Sounds a little strong.
I didn't make Chicago the most segregated city in the United States. And I believe that was reported by quite a few news organizations. So it is what it is.
So Karen, going one step further, it's one thing to have this study and this this vision and idea for the best way to educate our children, but unless it's read by folks that are heading up the schools right now and implement it, it doesn't mean anything. So what are your plans to get this in front of the mayor, CEO Brizard, the head of the school board, to maybe see if they would be open to incorporating these ideas?
Well, we've certainly printed enough copies for them to have, and we will be sharing those with them, but we do want to draw your attention to the fact that this study is fully resourced. So if you look at the back, we have endnotes. There's a ton of research there. This, again, is not politically driven. This is driven by something that we've been talking about for a long time that, as a matter of fact, have come from questions that you all have asked us in terms of what are your solutions. So we looked at what the research that's available at this moment in time about what the solutions are. And we certainly do intend to have a very good, robust conversation. We have actually been having some of those with the district, but now we will have this in a more formal context.
But at the same time, I mean, it can't be ignored that you guys are under contract negotiations at this time. And there's several things in there that would directly speak to that. Adding more teachers for arts, music, adding more, psychologists, nurses. How do you plan to pay for all that?
Well, I think they have a budget, and we actually have a committee that will be working with them on budget. It's not about the money. It's about priorities, Noreen. There is money. It is what you decide to do with it. That is something, again, we don't control, but we certainly will suggest.
Would you look at, it says it, I read it, but in the conclusion, I believe, but would you very much urge the mayor and Brizard to use TIF funds, and would that be part of your negotiations, is the use of TIF funds to help pay for some improvements?
We always urge the use of TIF funds to be appropriately used because they have robbed the school system of needed tax funding for quite some time. I mean, we've been talking about this since before when we were rank and file teachers in classrooms. So this is nothing new. That will not change. I think it's an important thing to continue to bring up. It has nothing to do necessarily with negotiations. We don't negotiate politics into our contracts.
Would you be willing to swap this plan?
I'm not willing to discuss any of this, Noreen, with you about negotiations. But thank you. We're not going to do that.
Karen, you said capital gains is your biggest of all the revenue sources. Have you talked to any legislators about it?
Yes, we have. We've been talking to legislators about a variety of ways to approach this, including speculative financial transaction taxes and a variety of ways to get the people that actually make the money. It's, to probably spend a little bit more of it where it needs to be.
Have any other states done a progressive tax on capital gains?
I believe it's in New York. They're working on something like that right now.
Karen, does your union offer maternity leave to teachers?
Does the union offer maternity leave?
Does the union have maternity leave? Do unionized teachers have maternity leave at this point? Because the CPS.
Are you talking about what CPS offers in their healthcare plan?
Yeah, but do you have maternity leave for your teachers? Do they get maternity leave?
They don't pay the teachers.
For the teachers that work.
Teachers and CPS don't get maternity leave.
Unionized teachers, do they get maternity leave?
No.
I don't know what. I don't understand the question.
Do you get paid maternity leave? Do the teachers?
No.
Teachers in the schools.
No.
Teachers that teach in schools?
Yes. Do they get paid maternity leave?
No.
Okay.
They never have.
And
Yes.
Is that on the table right now?
Everything's on the table. It's a negotiation. Everything's on the table. It's an open contract.
If CPS were to adopt some of these, would you accept these recommendations in lieu of reinstituting?
That would be a discussion we would have with our members, and we have not had that. So as leadership, we have a very different process. This is not about what Karen wants. This is what we discuss with our members and our rank and file. We have not had those discussions yet. It's totally different here, right? So when we have that discussion with our members, I'm sure they will let us know. We are in the process of putting some surveys together, and that's what we will take our cue based on what they tell us.
Talk about the timing of this report. Again, you guys are...
This is when it was finished, Noreen. This is when it was finished. We've been working on this.
It can't possibly be a coincidence.
Really?
Too much. So talk about that. How do you want this report to influence what's going on in the negotiation table?
Because we believe that if we all focus on education of our children, that we will all come to the same place. So thank you. Enjoy the read. You will enjoy it, I promise you. It's very good. It's a very good report. Thank you.